My name is Georgina. I am a security advisor and investigative analyst. I've been working in the field since my postgrad studies, and I've taken on a few different roles. I used to work with the G20 Information Center as a lead researcher for regional security and counterterrorism. And then I moved away from global governance and the public sector to work for a private intelligence firm called Flashpoint Intelligence. And they really combine the technological field with security solutions for governments and law enforcement agencies. I've been involved with supporting investigations ongoing on terrorism, on money laundering, on underground criminal networks on the dark web. And we do this through two things. Open source intelligence, so we can talk a bit about that later on. And we also do data analytics, which is used for everything, but we use data analytics to analyze what's happening and cause and effect and trends happening in the underground economy, and being able to forecast and foresee threats before they happen so that we can inform our clients, whether governments or law enforcement agencies, before they happen. So I started working in security in 2018. And the way that the field has evolved before I was ever in it is something that is worth considering when talking to people like me, because my experiences shouldn't be compared whatsoever to someone in law enforcement or someone privy to government secrets or in intelligence. There's two types of investigations. There is a data-based investigation that relies mostly on data that's already out there on the internet. So the first type of investigation is data-based, and it's based on information that I don't need to go out there and talk to anyone to get. It's stuff that's on the internet. If you are able to scrape the data, it's almost like kind of the job of a data scientist mixed with the job of a researcher that really knows the context of the underground community. The data-led investigations are a matter of combining those things. Then there's investigations that are very traditionally done. So you would hunt down your sources basically and interview anyone and everyone that's probably been a witness to the case. There's a case that I'm working on right now. It's related to the 2016 Egypt Air attack, and the terrorist behind the attack was an ISIS terrorist. His name's Basil Hassan. Not sure if he's dead or alive. Terrorists tend to have more than one life. So to investigate a situation like that, I wasn't investigating the actual attack because it happened a long time ago, but we were investigating kind of what went down, because that was one of the first ISIS attacks that was drone based. So I was out to find who started the drone program in ISIS. And this is important because when research like this is now made available, we can start holding people accountable to things that happened in the past. And it's almost like setting the record straight. So we wanted to figure out who supported the drone program financially. Terrorists don't appear out of nowhere. People have to finance them. They don't get weapons out of nowhere. They don't have the infrastructure to build their own weapons. So it has to have been supplied by some sort of military or government. And that's where most of my investigations tend to get messy. It's rarely ever the incident or the terrorist or the attack that we're investigating. It's usually the spider web of links and people that support and governments that support and financial institutions that support and nonprofits that support. It's really so decentralized, and it's like once you start, it's really a spider web that has no end. So in the case of the Egypt Air attack, I linked it back to Basil, who I ended up connecting with his cousin on Facebook, who was, a normal person. They're actually from Denmark. And, he was a foreign fighter. And I learned a lot about his upbringing through interviewing Basil. And then I found his ex-wife. This is all like one thing leads to another. It's a very traditional way of investigating, and journalists are trained to do this. I was talking to his ex-wife, who was a Yazidi survivor. She was bought and sold by ISIS, and she had been in the room where some of these attacks were being planned, and she was able to guide me on how these things happen. I actually have voice notes that are being made public next month from Basil to her. He said something about, like, I don't want the kids near the weapons or something at home. And I remember listening to that and being like, that's so insane. Like, this woman has lived a very, very scary life. That's less of a data-based investigation and more so a human-based investigation, where you actually have to talk to people and get people to trust you, and you have to know what questions to ask. And you also need to, it's a responsibility more than anything, because when we ask these questions to people that are at risk, so Layla survived her ISIS captivity, but she is still out there. She's in Iraq. So when I make her testimony public, I am directly putting her at risk, and that's a decision that is probably the hardest to make when you're in a position like mine, and it requires a lot of government support. You do have to partner with law enforcement regionally and locally, as well as actual governments. So most of the cases that I was assigned to research were on counterterrorism. There were terrorism operations, whether recruitment or financing, that I was assigned to research to provide reports to governments that are at risk. And the reason being is because I'm Egyptian. I was the only Arabic speaking one in the office, and I also studied a lot of political science, economic background things, so it was directly in line with what I was familiar with from a context point of view. I remember my boss assigned me to monitor this thread that was happening on the dark web, and basically I just write reports about everything happening. Every 10 minutes we'd update it and send it to law enforcement that was working on the case. Still to date, probably the most disturbing thing I've ever had to witness. And it was this guy in Nebraska who had a child, and he posted on a forum for dark web it was a specific forum that I'm not going to mention on the podcast. There's legal things involved. You can't be encouraging people to go on the dark web and look for things like this, right? So he was on this forum, and he offered to give his kid away in return for $1 million loan. And he said, you can use the kid as assurance, and I'll pay you back in 2 weeks. You keep the kid, and if I don't pay you back in 2 weeks, you can kill my kid. It was the most there are no words that are appropriate to use for something like this. It was incredibly disturbing. The thing about the dark web too is you see so many crazy things happening, and sometimes it's a false alarm, but sometimes it's not. And our job is to also filter out what's a false alarm and what's a real alarm. So my job that day was to update on what was happening through the forum and who was offering, and I'd report back to our chief scientist, who consisted of software engineers, ethical hackers, very highly skilled people that were trying to trace the IP addresses of everyone involved in that forum discussion. And they would report back to a nonprofit that we worked with, founded by a former cop, and he's a good friend of mine. His name's Kevin Metcalf. He's one of the smartest people I know. His nonprofit does work to support law enforcement and prosecutors in the fight against child trafficking. And it's called the National Task Force for Child Protection, and it was actually based in Nebraska. So that's actually how we got in touch with them in the first place, is when we figured out where this was taking place. We contacted the nonprofit working on this. We partnered with them, and we were able to provide reports to the police department there, and we found the kid, and the kid was actually at that guy's house that loaned the kid's dad $1 million, and God knows what could have happened to the kid if law enforcement didn't track that down in time.